We will now be going over the answer key to Mendel and his study of pea plants one-factor crosses. I have already written down the answers to the questions that go over the concepts and the terms. The next set of questions that go over the problem solving, I'll be working through with you. I'll quickly read through these, knowing that you can pause the video anytime to write these answers down. The next set of problems, however, I'll be working through with you. So for one, what is genetics? It's just the branch of biology that studies the way hereditary information is passed from one generation to the next. We say often that Mendel is the father of genetics because he paved the pathway for those studies. 2, list 4 reasons as to why Mendel used pea plants. They're easy to grow, they mature quickly, they're easy to pollinate or reproduce, and distinct characteristics. So unlike humans, where our skin color or our height have a whole spectrum of variations, pea plants either are purple or white in flower color, they're either tall or they are short, so they have easily distinguishable characteristics. Number 3, an allele is a version or a form of a gene that controls a trait. Phenotype is the physical appearance of a trait, and you can remember that pH is for physical, pH is in phenotype. Genotype is just the genetic representation of a trait. So the genotype, big T, or big T, little t, is the genotype for tall. The genotype little t is the genotype for the phenotype short. So there's 2 possible genotypes for the phenotype tall, only 1 possible genotype for the phenotype short. 5, how is being homozygous different from being heterozygous? Homozygous is 2 of the same allele, heterozygous is 2 different alleles. So then for the next table that you see here, these are 3 different traits that we can observe in pea plants. The seed coat shape, round, dominant over wrinkled. Pea pod color, green dominant over yellow. The height of the plant, tall dominant over short. Now in the video, you see that we went over these. The genotype of a homozygous dominant organism. So this was for the seed coat shape. So homozygous dominant means that we're looking at the dominant trait, capital R. The genotype for that, if it's homozygous, is capital R, capital R. Now make sure to read carefully because it's easy to overlook, as I had done. So for 1B, it's actually asking for the phenotype. So if it's the phenotype, it's asking actually for the physical appearance, which is round. 1C, the genotype. So we're looking for the actual alleles of a homozygous recessive is little r, little r. The phenotype, so we're looking for the physical appearance of a homozygous recessive organism is wrinkled. The genotype of a heterozygote is capital R, little r. We could have also said the genotype of a hybrid. The phenotype is round. So for the pod color trait, so we're looking at this one right here. Capital G, lowercase g, green, and yellow. We're looking at this one here. So the genotype would be for homozygous dominant, capital G, capital G. The phenotype, however, the physical appearance would be green. The genotype of a homozygous recessive would be lowercase g. The phenotype for that homozygous recessive would be yellow. The genotype of a heterozygote or a hybrid would be capital G, lowercase g. And the phenotype of that heterozygote would be green. So to now go on to the problems, I'll just keep this table up here because we are going to be referring to these same traits right here. I just want to make sure that you got that. I don't know if it was out of shot from the camera, so there. And here we have now the problems. So for the following problems, show the Punnett square, then give the genotypic and phenotypic ratios. So Punnett square, that's part 1, right? Genotype ratio, part 2. Phenotype ratio, part 3. So for numbers 3 through 6, we're given the genotypes. But for numbers 7 through 10, we have to determine the genotypes. And then 11 is taking it one step higher, so we have to apply our thinking. So going to number 3, we're looking at the letter R, so that's round and wrinkled. So to set up the Punnett square, here we go, and we have our hybrid, which is capital R, lowercase r, homozygous dominant, capital R, and then we fill out our Punnett square as follows. Now, to then answer the question, which is genotypic and phenotypic ratios, the genotypic ratio, okay, we only have 2 possible genotypes that we ended up with. So for the genotypic ratio, we have in our Punnett square the possibilities of capital R, and capital R, lowercase r. We don't have any other possibilities. We have 2 homozygous dominant and we have 2 heterozygotes. We don't have any other genotypes that we ended up with. So we have a 2-to-2 ratio. We typically end up reducing that to a 1-to-1 ratio. If on any sort of assessment you gave me a 2-to-2 ratio, I would accept that. We typically do reduce it to 1-to-1, but that's acceptable. So this is our genotypic ratio. Now, to determine the phenotypic ratio, we have everything as being round. Every possibility here has a dominant allele. Everything here is therefore round. So if we compare the amount of rounds that we have to the amounts of wrinkles that we have, all of them are round. None of them are wrinkled. So 4-to-0 is the phenotypic ratio, and that's the answer for number 3. So go on to number 4, and it's very similar. It's just with a different trait. So we have capital G, lowercase g, combined with capital G. So here, this is something that is just basically the same pattern, different traits, but homozygous dominant. Here's our heterozygote and our heterozygote. So our genotypic ratio is just comparing capital G, lowercase g, and here's 2-to-2. We typically do reduce that to 1-to-1, as I said. If you put that, I would not mark it as incorrect. And in this case, we're not comparing round and wrinkled. In this case, it would be green to yellow, and we have a ratio of 4-to-0. So 4-to-0 would be the phenotypic ratio. Now for the next one, number 5, we are crossing 2 heterozygotes with each other, or we can say that we're crossing 2 hybrids. So when we set up this Punnett square, I'm crossing capital T, lowercase t, with, I'm going to get that out of the way, with capital T, lowercase t. So here's a homozygous dominant, a heterozygote, and a homozygous recessive. So in this case, we have 3 different possibilities for phenotype and 3 possibilities for genotype. So for genotype, I do have a possibility of homozygous dominant. I have the possibility for heterozygote, and a homozygous recessive. So overall, I could have one of big T. I have two possibilities for the heterozygote and one possibility for the homozygote recessive. So overall, my genotypic ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. Now for the phenotypic ratio, because here we're dealing with the letter T, so it is tall and dealing with height, there is two possibilities, right? So we're either dealing with tall or short, and 3 of these possibilities have the dominant T allele. So 3 for tall and 1 may be short. So 3 to 1 is our phenotypic ratio. And it then ends up being a similar pattern for number 6, which is another 1 to 2 to 1, another 3 to 1 ratio. So I'll just work through that here because, right, this is just extra practice. So the homozygous dominant to the heterozygote to the homozygous recessive in a 1 to 2 to 1 genotypic ratio. And in this case, it's a different phenotype, which is round to wrinkled. And that's a 3 to 1 phenotypic ratio. So for number 7, we are being given the words and we have to then determine the genotypes. And for number 7, it says to cross 2 heterozygous green plants. So if it's heterozygous, it has 2 different alleles, and we're told that it's green. So we know that we're dealing with capital G, lowercase g, that sort of letter. And therefore, if we're dealing with a green plant that's heterozygous, what we're crossing here is this. So if it's 2 heterozygous green plants, it's capital G, lowercase g, being crossed with capital G, lowercase g. And then as you see, the rest is the same as what we've been doing. Nevertheless, I'll just show it for you anyway so you can see all the work. And here is capital G, lowercase g. And I fill out the Punnett square with my homozygous dominant there, the heterozygote, homozygous recessive. And my genotypic ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. So there's my genotypic ratio here. And then my phenotypic ratio, which is green to yellow, that is 3 to 1. So that's the answer for number 7. For number 8, it says cross a homozygous green plant with a heterozygous green plant. So we see that both of them are showing the dominant phenotype. So homozygous green plant means it has 2 of the same alleles, and green is the dominant. So we know that it's capital G, capital G. A heterozygous green plant has 2 different alleles, so it's capital G, lowercase g. All right, and then the rest is the same as what we've been doing. So we set up this, capital G, lowercase g. If you set up the heterozygote across that side and capital G along that side, that's absolutely fine. And then fill this out as follows, capital G, the heterozygous there. And for the genotypic possibilities, we have capital G, lowercase g, and we have 2 of each. Typically, we do reduce it, so I will put that there, but If you didn't, that's okay. But typically we do reduce it. And for green to yellow, the phenotypic ratio in that case is also 1 to 1. Then cross a homozygous tall with a short plant. So if we know it's homozygous tall, it's two of the same allele. We know tall is dominant. Now then it says short, so it doesn't tell us if it is homozygous or heterozygous. But the fact that it is the recessive phenotype, there's only one genotypic possibility for that phenotype. So therefore, if it's short, the only genotype possible for that is the two recessives. So now we can figure that out. And here's capital T, two lowercase t's, and here is the Punnett square for that. So the genotypic ratio is when you see that we have all of one possibility. If they're all these hybrids, we say it's like we have 4 of one and none of anything else. So there's our genotypic ratio. For the phenotype, they're all tall. So for the phenotypic ratio, we have 4 talls and none of anything else. For number 10, it says something about seed color. It says cross a white seed plant with a heterozygous brown seed plant. So if we go back to our table here, we don't see anything here about seed color, about white or brown seeds. But despite that, we can still solve this. So cross a white seed plant with a heterozygous brown seed plant. So if we think about this, the fact that it's saying that this is heterozygous brown, but it's not giving us more specific information about the white seed plant, must then lead us to conclude that the brown trait must be dominant and the white must be recessive. So the heterozygous brown is capital B lowercase b, because that's heterozygous brown. And the white seed plant has 2 recessives. So now we can set up the Punnett square for that. And we have capital B lowercase b, 2 lowercase b's. So here's our heterozygote, 2 of the homozygous recessives. So for the genotypic ratio, here are our 2 possibilities. And we have 2 to 2, which really is just 1 to 1. And then for the phenotypic ratio, we have brown. These 2 are brown, and then these 2 are white. So for phenotypic ratio of brown to white, it really reduces 2 to 2, reduces to 1 to 1. Now for the last one, we have in squash, the allele for white fruits is dominant over the allele for yellow. If a white fruited plant is crossed with a yellow fruited plant and all the offspring are yellow, what are the possible genotypes of the parents and the offspring? Okay, so here are the alleles that we are dealing with. We have a capital W for white, which is dominant, and then we have a lowercase w for yellow, which is recessive. So just a side note, the capital W and lowercase w have similar shapes. So for the G, they don't really have the same shape. T doesn't have the same shape, B doesn't have the same shape, but W does. So in letters that do have the same shape, I put a dash over it because other than size, when you're writing quickly, it may not be easy to distinguish uppercase versus lowercase. Anyway, so in squash, all right, took care of the first sentence. So if we cross a white fruited plant with a yellow fruited plant and all of the offspring are yellow, what are the possible genotypes of the parents and the offspring? So in purple is all the information that we're given. Now in blue, I'm going to write all the genotypic possibilities because that's what they're asking for, is the genotypes. So for white, for the white parent can either be capital W, or that parent could be capital W, lowercase w. The offspring, the other parent, the yellow parent, would have to be lowercase w. That's the only possibility for that parent. Since all the offspring are yellow, they all must be lowercase w. So now we know the answer for the offspring, so it must be lowercase w. We know that one of the parents is lowercase w. But now we have to determine the genotype for the white parent. Which one must it be? Okay, well, we can try the two possibilities. So if it's homozygous dominant, versus heterozygous, let's see how the offspring are different. So if it's homozygous dominant with the yellow parent, then the question is there the possibility for yellow offspring? And there's not, it's all white. If we have as a possibility the heterozygote with the other yellow parent, is there the possibility for yellow offspring? And the answer to that question is yes. There's the possibility of yellow offspring. So the genotype for the other parent is the heterozygote. And that X there just indicates that it's crossed with that. So even though it's the heterozygote and the yellow cross to give us the yellow offspring, and here it appears that even though the predicted ratio is 1:1, why is it that all of the offspring are yellow? Keep in mind this is the predicted ratio. So it is possible that you could get all yellow offspring. Just as a real world example, the possibility of getting a boy or a girl is always 50%. But we do see families where all the children are boys or all the children are girls. So between the man and the woman, they may have, for example, 3 sons, or they may have 3 daughters. So that's a possibility. All right, so email me if you guys have any questions.